Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 6 of our complete practice question series for the SC-100 Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 6. Question number 193. Scenario. A hybrid enterprise has Microsoft intra-hybrid joined Windows 11 endpoints and forward security detections to Microsoft Sentinel. The SOC wants to plant realistic cached credential lures on selected client devices so that attempts to harvest or use those credentials generate high-confidence alerts. Which capability should the security architect recommend for creating the credential lures? The available options are as follows. Option A, a deception rule in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Option B, a honey token tag in Microsoft Defender for Identity. Option C, user and entity behavior analytics in Microsoft Sentinel. Option D, a user risk policy in Microsoft Intra ID Protection. The correct answer is option A deception rule in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint deception rules can deploy realistic lures, including credential artifacts, to supported endpoints. Interaction with those lures generates high-confidence detections that can be integrated with Microsoft Sentinel. Why are the other options not correct? B, a Defender for Identity honey token tag helps detect suspicious use of a designated identity or directory object, but does not deploy cached credential lures to Windows endpoints. C, Sentinel UEBA analyzes existing activity for anomalies. It does not create deceptive credentials on devices. D, an intra-ID protection user risk policy responds to identity risk signals and does not plant endpoint deception artifacts. Exam tip. Use deception rules to create endpoint lures. Use SIEM and UEBA to correlate and investigate the resulting alerts. Question number 194. Scenario. A Microsoft 365 E5 organization already applies Microsoft Purview DLP policies to Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. Employees use managed Windows devices and have begun visiting public generative AI websites. The security team plans to use Microsoft Purview Data Security Posture Management for AI to discover third-party AI usage and evaluate the data submitted from endpoints. What should the organization do first? The available options are as follows. Option A, assign a Microsoft 365 Copilot license to every employee. Option B, onboard the Windows devices to Microsoft Purview. Option C, enable Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management for all employees. Option D, configure an application data connector for every public generative AI website. The correct answer is option B, onboard the Windows devices to Microsoft Purview. Here's why. Endpoint onboarding provides Microsoft Purview with the device and browser activity visibility required to assess supported third-party generative AI usage and data interactions through DSPM for AI. Why are the other options not correct? A, Microsoft 365 Copilot licensing is not required merely to monitor supported third-party generative AI websites. C, Insider risk management can consume relevant signals, but is not the initial prerequisite for endpoint-based AI activity visibility. D, public generative AI website monitoring does not require a separate application data connector for every website. Exam tip. For Purview controls that inspect data movement through endpoint applications or browsers, establish endpoint onboarding first. Question number 195. Scenario. An engineering company has created custom sensitive information types for proprietary designs. Employees access third-party generative AI websites from managed Windows computers. The security architecture must inspect prompts submitted through supported browsers and prevent prompts containing protected engineering information from being sent. Complete the recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Enforce the prompt blocking requirement by using Microsoft Purview the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are information protection, data loss prevention, information barriers, or insider risk management. Statement 2. Provide visibility into prompts sent from the Windows computers by the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are assigning Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses, deploying the information protection scanner, onboarding the devices, to Microsoft Purview, or implementing an application data connector. For Statement 1, the correct selection is data loss prevention. DLP policies can detect protected content and prevent it from being submitted to supported third-party generative AI sites. For Statement 2, the correct selection is onboarding the devices to Microsoft Purview. Onboarding enables endpoint data classification, activity inspection, and policy enforcement. Exam tip: classification identifies sensitive data, while endpoint DLP applies the preventive control when users submit that data to external AI services. Question number 196. Scenario: an enterprise is designing application landing zones for 3 digital products. Each product requires separate development, test, and production environments. A different team will administer each environment, and secrets must remain isolated in a dedicated Azure Key Vault. Assuming each independently managed environment receives its own subscription boundary, complete the deployment recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Provision the blank application landing zone subscriptions. The choices for Statement 1 are 3, 10, 9, or 1. Statement 2. Provision the blank Azure Key Vaults. The choices for Statement 2 are 1, 9, 3, or 10. For Statement 1, the correct selection is 9. Each of the 3 products requires separate development, test, and production subscription boundaries. For Statement 2, the correct selection is 9. A dedicated key vault for every environment preserves administrative, authorization, and secret isolation boundaries. Exam tip: when teams and lifecycle environments require independent governance, calculate subscription and secret store boundaries per application environment. Question number 197. Scenario: a legal services organization has a conditional access policy for all employees accessing Microsoft 365. The policy requires multi-factor authentication and a Microsoft intra-hybrid joined device. However, sign-ins originating from the headquarters named location are excluded from the policy. The architect is aligning the policy with Zero Trust Rapid Modernization Plan guidance. Which policy configuration should be changed? The available options are as follows. Option A: the inclusion of all employees. Option B: the requirement for multi-factor authentication. Option C: the exclusion of the headquarters named location. Option D: the requirement for a Microsoft intra-hybrid joined device. The correct answer is Option C, the exclusion of the headquarters named location. Here's why. Zero Trust requires explicit verification regardless of whether a sign-in originates from an internal or familiar network. Excluding headquarters bypasses the MFA and device requirements and therefore treats network location as an implicit trust signal. Why are the other options not correct? A. Applying the policy broadly to employees supports consistent zero trust enforcement. B. Requiring multi-factor authentication strengthens explicit identity verification. D. Requiring a managed or hybrid joined device provides a device trust signal in addition to identity verification. Exam tip: named locations can provide risk context, but a corporate network should not automatically bypass strong authentication and device controls. Question number 198. Scenario: a research organization uses an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace containing a dedicated SQL pool and a built-in serverless SQL pool that queries files in Azure storage. The security standard requires a second independent layer of encryption at rest for both data platforms. Complete the encryption design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. For the dedicated SQL pool, use the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are server-side encryption, infrastructure encryption, or transparent data encryption. Statement 2. For the storage accessed by the serverless SQL pool, use the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are transparent data encryption, infrastructure encryption, or server-side encryption. For Statement 1, the correct selection is transparent data encryption. TDE encrypts the dedicated SQL pool's data, log, and backup files at rest. For statement 2, the correct selection is infrastructure encryption. Infrastructure encryption adds a second encryption layer to supported Azure storage data used by the serverless pool. Exam tip. A dedicated SQL pool is protected at the database layer with TD, while serverless SQL data inherits its at-rest protection from the underlying storage account. Question number 199. Scenario. A company manages its Microsoft intra-joined Windows devices through Microsoft Intune. All employees use standard accounts. Members of a software support group must periodically run an approved application updater that requires local administrative privileges. The solution must permit elevation only for the approved process and must not grant persistent local administrator membership. Which capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Windows Local Administrator Password Solution. Option B, Microsoft Intra Entitlement Management. Option C, Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management. Option D, Microsoft Intune Endpoint Privilege Management. The correct answer is option D, Microsoft Intune Endpoint Privilege Management. Here's why. Endpoint Privilege Management allows standard users to elevate approved executables under centrally defined rules. It supports least privilege by avoiding permanent membership in the local administrators group. Why are the other options not correct? A. Windows Labs secures and rotates local administrator passwords, but does not provide application-specific elevation for standard users. B. Entitlement management governs access packages and resource access lifecycles rather than local process elevation. C. Microsoft Intra-PIM provides time-bound activation of supported directory and Azure roles, not elevation of a Windows application installer. Exam tip. Use endpoint privilege management when users need controlled elevation for approved processes without becoming persistent local administrators. Question number 200. Scenario. A multinational company has a private web application hosted in its Frankfurt data center. Most application users are located in Europe, while the company's Microsoft Intratenant was created in North America. The company will use Microsoft Intra-Private Access, application proxy connectors in Frankfurt, and an ExpressRoute circuit connected at the nearest peering location. The design must provide connector redundancy, minimize latency, maintain secure connectivity, and avoid unnecessary premium charges. Complete the connectivity design. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Deploy the blank to provide local regional optimization and connector resilience. The choices for Statement 1 are 2 connectors in the default connector group, 1 connector in the default group and 1 in a new group, or 2 connectors in a new region-optimized connector group. Statement 2. Connect the connector network to Microsoft services through ExpressRoute by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are private peering, Microsoft peering with the premium add-on, or Microsoft peering. For Statement 1, the correct selection is 2 connectors in a new region-optimized connector group. The new connector group can be associated with the appropriate service region, while 2 connectors prevent a single connector failure from interrupting access. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft peering. Application proxy connector traffic reaches Microsoft service endpoints through Microsoft peering. Exam tip. Use connector groups for regional placement and application isolation, and deploy multiple connectors in each production group for high availability. Question number 201. Scenario. An organization has 12 on-premises Active Directory domain controllers. Each controller generates approximately 420 megabytes of Windows security event data per day. All events must be ingested into a Microsoft Sentinel workspace, and ingestion charges must be minimized. Which recommendation best satisfies the requirements? The available options are as follows. Option A. Onboard every domain controller to Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2. Option B. Store the domain controller events in the auxiliary logs plan. Option C. Upgrade all Microsoft 365 users from E3 to E5. Option D. Configure a daily ingestion cap on the Microsoft Sentinel workspace. Option E. Collect Windows security events from only one domain controller. The correct answer is Option A. onboard every domain controller to Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2 includes a Microsoft Sentinel data ingestion benefit of up to 500 megabytes per protected server per day for eligible security data. Each domain controller generates less than that amount, allowing all required Windows security events to be collected while reducing ingestion charges. Why are the other options not correct? B. Auxiliary logs provide lower-cost storage for supported data, but do not provide the same Defender for Servers ingestion entitlement and analytics behavior required for the complete security event stream. C. Upgrading end-user Microsoft 365 licenses does not provide the per-server Sentinel ingestion allowance required for the domain controllers. D. A daily cap can stop ingestion after the limit is reached, violating the requirement to collect every event. E. Collecting from only one domain controller leaves the other controllers unmonitored. Exam tip. When Defender for Servers Plan 2 is available, include its per-node Microsoft Sentinel ingestion benefit in security logging cost designs. Question number 202. Scenario. An enterprise manages Azure resources and has connected its Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and Oracle Cloud estates to its broader security governance program. The cloud security team creates a custom security standard in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. To which cloud environments can the custom Defender for Cloud standard be assigned? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. Option B. Azure and Oracle Cloud only. Option C. Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Oracle Cloud. Option D. Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and Oracle Cloud. Option E. Azure only. The correct answer is Option A. Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for Cloud custom security standards can be assigned across supported Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud environments. Oracle Cloud subscriptions are not included in that custom standard assignment scope. Why are the other options not correct? B. This omits AWS and includes unsupported Oracle Cloud scope. C. This incorrectly substitutes Oracle Cloud for Google Cloud. D. Oracle Cloud cannot be included in the custom standard assignment. E. Custom standards are not restricted to Azure when supported AWS and Google Cloud environments are connected. Exam tip. Verify the supported cloud scopes of each Defender for Cloud posture capability. Multi-cloud support does not automatically mean every cloud provider is included. Question number 203. Scenario. A Microsoft 365 E5 organization wants to identify users whose SharePoint Online download volumes deviate significantly from their normal behavior. The solution must use behavioral analytics rather than only matching file content or labels. Complete the security recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Analyze SharePoint activity by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, or Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Statement 2. Detect abnormal download behavior through the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are a file policy, an endpoint DLP policy, an anomaly detection policy, or a SharePoint DLP policy. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Defender for Cloud Apps provides SaaS activity monitoring, behavioral analytics, and governance. For Statement 2, the correct selection is an anomaly detection policy. Anomaly detection compares user behavior with established patterns and flags atypical download volumes. Exam tip. Use anomaly detection for behavior that deviates from a baseline. Use DLP when the decisive condition is the sensitivity or destination of the content. Question number 204. Scenario. A Microsoft 365 organization uses Microsoft Purview classifiers and automatic sensitivity labeling. The security team must prevent users from uploading unlabeled files to SharePoint Online when the files contain content that classifiers identify as sensitive. The control must evaluate the upload session and block the transaction in real time. Complete the recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Configure in the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Compliance Policy, App Control Policy, or App Protection Policy. Statement 2. Enforce the upload control through the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, or Endpoint Data Loss Prevention. For Statement 1, the correct selection is App Control Policy. An app control policy defines the real-time session action for the sensitive file upload. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Defender for Cloud Apps provides the session control capability used to inspect and block the SharePoint transaction. Exam tip: use session-based app control when the requirement is to inspect and block a cloud application transaction as it occurs. Question number 205. Scenario: a media company hosts public Azure App Service applications in several geographic regions. The security architecture must inspect inbound HTTPS requests by using OWASP-based managed rules, provide Microsoft-managed TLS certificates, and direct each user to the closest healthy application deployment. Operational management must be minimized. Which service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Application Gateway with Web Application Firewall. Option B, Azure Firewall Premium. Option C, Azure Front Door Premium with Web Application Firewall. Option D, Azure Traffic Manager with Azure Firewall Standard. The correct answer is Option C, Azure Front Door Premium with Web Application Firewall. Here's why. Azure Front Door provides global Layer 7 routing to the closest healthy regional origin, supports Microsoft-managed TLS certificates, and integrates with Web Application Firewall managed rule sets for OWASP-based request inspection. It supplies these capabilities as a managed global edge service. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Application Gateway provides regional application delivery and WAF protection, but does not independently provide the required global nearest origin routing across regions. B. Azure Firewall Premium is a centralized network firewall and is not the appropriate global HTTP application delivery service for app service origins. D. Azure Traffic Manager performs DNS-based global routing, but it does not inspect HTTPS requests with an integrated WAF. Azure Firewall Standard also does not supply the required OWASP web application rule processing. Exam tip: choose Azure Front Door with WAF when a public multi-region web architecture requires global routing, edge TLS, and managed Layer 7 threat protection. Question number 206. Scenario: a logistics company manages 24 Windows Server systems in a private data center through Azure Arc. The servers currently use Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 1. Security architects must add centralized visibility into vulnerable BIOS versions, processors, hardware models, and firmware-related security updates. Which licensing change should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, enroll the servers in Azure Update Manager. Option B, upgrade the servers to Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2. Option C, purchase the Microsoft Intune Suite for the server administrators. Option D, add Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management Endpoint add-on licenses. The correct answer is Option B. Upgrade the servers to Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2. Here's why. Defender Vulnerability Management premium capabilities for server devices are included with Defender for Servers Plan 2. These capabilities include hardware and firmware assessment, inventories, vulnerability insights, and firmware update recommendations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Update Manager assesses and deploys operating system updates, but does not provide the Defender hardware and firmware vulnerability inventory. C. Microsoft Intune Suite is not the licensing path for premium vulnerability assessment of Azure Arc-enabled servers. D. The Defender Vulnerability Management Endpoint add-on is used for eligible client licensing scenarios. Server premium capabilities are provided through Defender for Servers Plan 2. Exam tip: for servers, distinguish the core vulnerability features in Plan 1 from premium hardware, firmware, certificate, and baseline assessments in Plan 2. Question number 207. Scenario: A financial organization operates several SQL Server instances in its data center. The databases must be assessed regularly for excessive permissions, insecure configurations, and other weaknesses that could expose regulated information. Which Microsoft security platform should the organization configure to enable vulnerability assessment for the SQL Server instances? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud with Defender for SQL Servers on machines. Option B, Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. Option C, Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management for Endpoints. Option D, Microsoft Purview Data Governance. The correct answer is Option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud with Defender for SQL Servers on machines. Here's why. Defender for SQL Servers on machines extends Defender for Cloud protection to supported SQL Server instances, including Azure Arc-enabled on-premises servers, and provides recurring database vulnerability assessments with remediation guidance. Why are the other options not correct? B. Purview DLP controls inappropriate data use and sharing. It does not scan SQL Server configurations for database vulnerabilities. C. Defender Vulnerability Management assesses endpoint software, hardware, and configuration exposure rather than database-level SQL security findings. D. Purview Data Governance discovers, catalogs, and classifies data, but is not the SQL vulnerability scanning platform. Exam tip. Use Defender for SQL for database threat protection and vulnerability assessment. Use Purview when the requirement is data discovery, classification, or governance. Question number 208. Scenario. A professional services company licenses all employees with Microsoft 365 E5. Every corporate Windows 11 device is Microsoft Intra-joined and managed through Microsoft Intune. Devices running Windows builds below the organization's approved minimum must be denied access to Microsoft 365. Which two policy types should the security architect combine? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, a Microsoft Intra-conditional access policy. Option B, a Microsoft Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance policy. Option C, a Microsoft Intra-ID protection sign-in risk policy. Option D, a Microsoft Intune device compliance policy. Option E, a Microsoft Defender for endpoint security policy. The correct answers are Option A, a Microsoft Intra-conditional access policy, and Option D, a Microsoft Intune device compliance policy. Here's why. The Intune compliance policy marks devices non-compliant when their Windows version is below the approved minimum. Conditional access then requires a compliant device for Microsoft 365 access and blocks devices that fail the compliance evaluation. Why are the other options not correct? B. Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance evaluates cloud resource posture, not Windows client eligibility for Microsoft 365. C. A sign-in risk policy responds to authentication risk, not operating system build compliance. E. Endpoint security policies configure protective controls but do not provide the compliance state and access enforcement combination required here. Exam tip. Use Intune to calculate device compliance and conditional access to enforce that compliance at the sign-in boundary. Question number 209. Scenario. A media company uses Microsoft 365 and hosts a customer portal in Azure App Service. A partner organization has its own Microsoft intratenant. Partner employees must access selected Microsoft Teams shared channels without creating conventional guest accounts. Customers of the public portal must be able to sign in with supported social identities. Administrative overhead must be minimized. Complete the external identity architecture. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Provide partner tenant access to the Teams shared channels by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Intra B2B collaboration, cross-tenant synchronization, Microsoft Intra B2B Direct Connect, or Microsoft Intra External ID for customers. Statement 2. Provide social identity authentication for portal customers by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are cross-tenant synchronization, Microsoft Intra External ID for customers, Microsoft Intra B2B Direct Connect, or Microsoft Intra B2B collaboration. For statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Intra B2B Direct Connect. B2B Direct Connect is designed for cross-tenant teams' shared channel collaboration. For statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Intra External ID for customers. External ID for customers supports customer sign-up and sign-in through local and federated social identities. Exam tip: use B2B Direct Connect for teams, shared channels, and external ID for customers for consumer-facing application identities. Question number 210. Scenario: an enterprise operates Azure resources and 140 virtual machines in another cloud provider. The security team wants to manage posture from Azure and evaluate the non-Azure machines against security recommendations and configuration standards. Which two services should the architect integrate? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Lighthouse. Option B, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Option C, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option D, Microsoft Sentinel. Option E, Azure Arc-enabled servers. The correct answers are Option C, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and Option E, Azure Arc-enabled servers. Here's why. Azure Arc projects non-Azure machines into Azure as manageable resources and enables the required agents and extensions. Defender for Cloud then evaluates their security posture and presents recommendations through a unified multi-cloud view. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Lighthouse delegates management across Azure tenants and subscriptions. It does not onboard arbitrary third-party cloud machines for posture assessment. B. Defender for Endpoint provides endpoint detection and response, but is not the unified cloud posture management service requested. D. Microsoft Sentinel is a SIEM and SOAR platform, not the service that establishes cloud configuration posture. Exam tip: Azure Arc provides the non-Azure resource connection. Defender for Cloud supplies posture assessment and workload protection. Question number 211. Scenario: a manufacturer has completed a ransomware risk assessment and classified its production control and identity systems as business critical. The security architect must prioritize controls that reduce privileged compromise and preserve a trustworthy recovery path. Which two actions align with Microsoft ransomware resilience guidance? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, retain immutable offline backups, restrict backup administration, and test restoration regularly. Option B, extend operating system patch cycles to reduce the frequency of production changes. Option C, enable firewall logging while leaving unnecessary inbound and outbound paths unrestricted. Option D, use Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management with just-in-time activation and approval. The correct answers are Option A, retain immutable offline backups, restrict backup administration, and test restoration regularly, and Option D, use Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management with just-in-time activation and approval. Here's why. Protected and tested backups preserve a recovery path that attackers cannot readily alter. PIM reduces standing privilege and introduces time limits, approvals, and auditing for high-impact administrative access. Together, they address recovery and privilege compromise. Why are the other options not correct? B. Longer patch cycles increase exposure to known vulnerabilities and conflict with rapid security update guidance. C. Logging without restricting unnecessary traffic provides visibility but leaves avoidable attack paths open. Exam tip: a ransomware strategy must protect both privileged control paths and the recovery environment. Backups alone are insufficient. Question number 212. Scenario: a global organization publishes several enterprise applications through Microsoft Intra ID. Legal and threat intelligence teams require sign-ins originating from a defined set of countries or regions to be blocked consistently across the applications. Which control should the security architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, device compliance policies in Microsoft Intune. Option B, activity policies in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option C, country-based named locations in Microsoft Intra conditional access policies. Option D, user risk policies in Microsoft Intra ID protection. Option E, sign-in risk policies in Microsoft Intra ID protection. The correct answer is option C, country-based named locations in Microsoft intra-conditional access policies. Here's why. Conditional access can evaluate sign-in locations derived from countries or regions and apply a block control to the targeted enterprise applications and users. Why are the other options not correct? A. Intune compliance policies assess device state and do not block access according to sign-in country. B. Defender for Cloud Apps activity policies detect or govern cloud app activity after integration, but are not the primary authentication control for country-based access. D. User risk policies evaluate the likelihood that an identity is compromised. E. Sign-in risk policies evaluate authentication risk rather than enforcing a fixed geographic deny list. Exam tip. Use conditional access named locations for geography-based access decisions. Use identity protection policies for calculated identity or sign-in risk. Question number 213. Scenario. A Microsoft 365 E5 organization operates Windows Server 2019 virtual machines that host different business applications. The security standard requires an allow list model. Unapproved executables, scripts, installers, and drivers must be blocked until the security team explicitly trusts them. Which security control should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. OAuth application governance policies in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option B. App control for business policies in enforced mode. Option C. Application registrations in Microsoft Intra ID. Option D. Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark Compliance Assessments. The correct answer is option B, app control for business policies in enforced mode. Here's why. App control for business implements application allow listing on supported Windows Server versions. Enforced policies permit only trusted applications, scripts, installers, and drivers and block code that does not satisfy the policy rules. Why are the other options not correct? A. OAuth application policies govern cloud app consent and behavior rather than executable code on Windows servers. C. Microsoft intra-application registrations define application identities and permissions, not operating system application allow lists. D. Benchmark assessments measure configuration posture, but do not automatically prevent unapproved code execution. Exam tip. Use app control for business to govern what code may run. Defender for Endpoint can monitor related events, but is not itself the application allow list policy. Question number 214. Scenario. A healthcare company wants to reduce privacy risk in Microsoft 365. The solution must discover overexposed or unused personal information, provide users with contextual guidance in Microsoft Teams when they transfer personal data, and recommend remediation actions. Which capability should the privacy architect include? The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Purview eDiscovery Premium. Option B. Microsoft Viva Insights. Option C. Microsoft Priva Privacy Risk Management. Option D. Microsoft Purview Communication Compliance. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Priva Privacy Risk Management. Here's why. Privacy risk management discovers personal data risks such as overexposure, unnecessary retention, and risky transfers. It can deliver teams policy tips and remediation guidance that help users correct risky data handling behavior. Why are the other options not correct? A. eDiscovery supports legal investigation, preservation, review, and export rather than proactive privacy coaching. B. Viva Insights focuses on work patterns and employee experience. D. Communication Compliance detects policy violations in communications, but does not provide the complete personal data privacy risk capability described. Exam tip. Choose Priva Privacy Risk Management when the requirement combines personal data discovery, privacy risk policies, user coaching, and remediation. Question number 215. Scenario. Microsoft Defender for Cloud generates suspicious authentication alerts for protected workloads. The security team needs low-code workflows that can be triggered automatically to enrich alerts, notify responders, and initiate remediation. Which Azure service should the architect recommend for the workflows? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure Event Hubs. Option B. Azure Logic Apps. Option C. Azure Functions. Option D. Azure Monitor webhooks. The correct answer is option B, Azure Logic Apps. Here's why. Defender for Cloud Workflow Automation can trigger consumption-based Azure Logic Apps for security alerts, recommendations, and compliance changes. Logic Apps provides low-code connectors and orchestration for notification, enrichment, and remediation. Why are the other options not correct? A. Event Hub streams events, but does not provide the required low-code response workflow. C. Azure Functions can implement custom code, but requires more development effort. D. Webhooks can deliver notifications to an endpoint, but do not provide a complete orchestration workflow. Exam tip. Defender for Cloud Workflow Automation invokes Logic Apps. In Microsoft Sentinel, playbooks are also implemented with Logic Apps. Question number 216. Scenario. A data engineering platform requires object storage services that support Microsoft intra-authorization for application data access and are suitable for analytics workloads. The design team is comparing Azure Blob Containers, hierarchical data lake storage, Azure Files, and managed disks. Which two object storage workloads should the architect select? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Managed Disks. Option B, Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2. Option C, Azure Files Shares. Option D, Azure Blob Storage Containers. The correct answers are Option B, Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2, and Option D, Azure Blob Storage Containers. Here's why. Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 is built on blob storage and adds a hierarchical namespace for analytics. Both object storage workloads support Microsoft intra-authorization and Azure are BAC for data plane access. Why are the other options not correct? A. Managed disks are block storage resources attached to virtual machines and are not object stores for analytics applications. C. Azure Files provides managed file shares rather than the object storage architecture specified in the transformed requirements. Exam tip. Blob storage and data lake storage generation 2 share object storage foundations. Azure Files is a file share service and managed disks provide block storage. Question number 217. Scenario. A development team stores the source code for a business-critical application in GitHub repositories. The security architecture must continuously analyze the code for vulnerabilities and present findings to developers within the repository workflow. Which capability should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Application Insights in Azure Monitor. Option B, Azure DevTest Labs. Option C, GitHub Advanced Security. Option D, Azure Key Vault. The correct answer is Option C, GitHub Advanced Security. Here's why. GitHub Advanced Security provides code scanning capabilities that analyze repository code for security vulnerabilities and integrate the findings into the developer workflow. Why are the other options not correct? A. Application Insights monitors the availability, performance, and runtime behavior of deployed applications rather than scanning source code. B. Azure DevTest Labs provides controlled development and testing environments, but is not a source code vulnerability scanner. D. Azure Key Vault protects secrets, keys, and certificates and does not analyze application code. Exam tip. Use code scanning for vulnerabilities in application source code. Use dependency scanning for vulnerable third-party components and Key Vault for secrets. Question number 218. Scenario. An enterprise operates multiple application landing zones, with each landing zone hosted in a separate Azure subscription. The security architecture must continuously assess resource configurations, provide security recommendations, monitor regulatory compliance, and enable workload protection capabilities for each landing zone. Which service should the architect configure for every application landing zone? The available options are as follows. Option A, an Azure Private DNS zone. Option B, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option C, an ExpressRoute gateway. Option D, Azure DDoS Network Protection. The correct answer is Option B, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for Cloud provides cloud security posture management, regulatory compliance assessment, security recommendations, and workload protection capabilities that can be enabled across landing zone subscriptions. Why are the other options not correct? A. A private DNS zone provides private name resolution but does not assess the security posture of landing zone resources. C. An ExpressRoute gateway supports private hybrid connectivity and is not a security posture management service. D. DDoS network protection mitigates network layer denial of service attacks but does not provide comprehensive posture assessment or workload protection. Exam tip. Use Defender for Cloud for landing zone posture and workload protection. Use networking services for specific connectivity and traffic protection requirements. Question number 219. Scenario. Your company is designing an application architecture that hosts web apps within an Azure App Service environment, ASE, deployed in an isolated subnet. The web apps must initiate outbound communication over an ExpressRoute connection to a specific on-premises application server. The on-premises application server is exposed via a public IP address, for example, 196.168.x.x, through the on-premises firewall. You need to recommend a solution to ensure that the web apps can communicate with the on-premises application server. The solution must minimize the number of public IP addresses that the on-premises firewall must allow inbound. What should you include in the recommendation? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure Traffic Manager with priority traffic routing methods. Option B. Azure Firewall with policy rule sets and user-defined routes, UDRs, on the ASE subnet. Option C. Azure Front Door with Azure Web Application Firewall, WAF. Option D. Azure Application Gateway v2 with user-defined routes, UDRs. The correct answer is option B, Azure Firewall with policy rule sets and user-defined routes, UDRs, on the ASE subnet. Here's why. By deploying Azure Firewall and configuring a user-defined route, UDR, on the app service environment, ASE, subnet to force outbound traffic through the firewall, all outbound requests to the on-premises public IP will originate from the Azure Firewall's single, static public IP address. This minimizes the number of IP addresses the on-premises firewall needs to allow list. Why are the other options not correct? A. Traffic Manager is a DNS-based load balancer for inbound traffic and does not control outbound source IP addresses. C. Azure Front Door is an inbound Layer 7 load balancer and CDN. It is not used to route or net outbound traffic from Azure to an on-premises network. D. Application Gateway is an inbound reverse proxy for web traffic, not a general outbound NAT/routing appliance. Exam tip. To present a single, predictable outbound public IP address from Azure resources to an external network, route the traffic through an Azure firewall or a NAT gateway. Question number 220. Scenario. A company hosts an Azure App Service application for internal employees. Employees must authenticate with Microsoft Entra accounts. They will request access through the My Apps portal, and a business sponsor must approve each request before access is granted. Complete the access architecture. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Integrate the app service application with Microsoft Entra authentication by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are a Microsoft Entra application registration, Azure Application Gateway, a managed identity, or Microsoft Entra application proxy. Statement 2. Implement request, approval, assignment, and expiration governance by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are a Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps Activity Policy, a Microsoft Entra Access Review, an access package and entitlement management, or a conditional access session policy. For Statement 1, the correct selection is a Microsoft Entra application registration. The registration establishes the application's identity and authentication relationship with the tenant. For Statement 2, the correct selection is an access package and entitlement management. Access packages support self-service requests, business approval, assignment policies, and lifecycle controls. Exam tip. Use application registration for authentication and entitlement management when access must be requested, approved, assigned, and expired as a governed package. Question number 221. Scenario. An enterprise is designing privileged access controls for a new Azure environment. The roadmap must follow Microsoft guidance for rapidly adopting a zero-trust privileged access strategy and prioritizing the highest impact controls. Which Microsoft framework should guide the roadmap? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Security Development Lifecycle. Option B, Microsoft Operational Security Assurance. Option C, Rapid Modernization Plan. Option D, Enhanced Security Admin Environment. The correct answer is Option C, Rapid Modernization Plan. Here's why. The Rapid Modernization Plan provides a prioritized roadmap for adopting Microsoft's recommended privileged access strategy based on zero-trust principles. Why are the other options not correct? A. The Security Development Lifecycle governs secure software development. B. Operational Security Assurance concerns secure operational practices for Microsoft engineering and services. D. ESE is a legacy administrative forest approach and is not the current modernization roadmap. Exam tip. Use RAMP for prioritized privileged access modernization and the enterprise access model for the broader current access architecture. Question number 222. Scenario. A governance team is introducing an Azure policy definition across existing subscriptions. During the initial assessment phase, the policy must identify non-compliant resources and report their compliance state without denying deployments or modifying resource configurations. Which Azure policy effect should the Cybersecurity Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, modify. Option B, audit. Option C, deny. Option D, append. The correct answer is Option B, audit. Here's why. The audit effect evaluates resources and marks matching resources as non-compliant without blocking deployments or changing resource configurations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Modify changes supported properties on new or existing resources. C. Deny prevents non-compliant resource requests from succeeding. D. Append adds supported fields or values to a resource request during deployment. Exam tip. Use audit to assess compliance without enforcement. Use deny to block, modify to remediate properties, and append to add request fields. Question number 223. Scenario. A small organization currently uses the Microsoft Entra ID free entitlement included with its cloud subscriptions. It will deploy Azure resources and wants to introduce time-bound activation, approval, and auditing for privileged Microsoft Entra and Azure roles. Which plan capability requires Microsoft Entra ID P2 or Microsoft Entra ID governance licensing? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure role-based access control assignments. Option B, resource-based authorization. Option C, Microsoft Entra multi-factor authentication. Option D, Microsoft Entra privileged identity management. The correct answer is Option D, Microsoft Entra privileged identity management. Here's why. Using all PIM settings requires Microsoft Entra ID P2 or Microsoft Entra ID governance licensing. PIM supplies eligible assignments, time-bound activation, approval, access reviews, alerts, and auditing for privileged roles. Why are the other options not correct? A. Basic Azure RBAC role assignments do not by themselves require PIM licensing. B. Resource-based authorization is a general authorization model rather than a separately licensed Microsoft Entra governance feature. C. Microsoft Entra multi-factor authentication has capabilities available through multiple license levels and does not uniquely require P2 or ID governance. Exam tip. PIM is the decisive premium capability for just-in-time privileged role activation. Ordinary Azure RBAC assignment is separate. Question number 224. Scenario. A medical organization collaborates through Microsoft Teams, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive. Microsoft Purview sensitive information types identify protected health information in messages and documents. The organization must stop users from sharing matching content with external recipients. Which policy type should the Data Security Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, retention policies. Option B, Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention Policies. Option C, Sensitivity Label Publishing Policies. Option D, Insider Risk Management Policies. The correct answer is option B, Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention Policies. Here's why. Purview DLP can detect protected health information in supported Microsoft 365 locations and restrict or block external sharing across Teams, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive. Why are the other options not correct? A. Retention policies govern how long content is kept or deleted, not whether sensitive content can be shared externally. C. Sensitivity labels classify and protect content, but a publishing policy alone does not implement the requested content-aware sharing rule. D. Insider risk management investigates risky user patterns rather than directly enforcing the cross-service PHI sharing restriction. Exam tip. Use DLP when the control must inspect sensitive content and prevent prohibited actions across Microsoft 365 services. Question number 225. Scenario. A security operations center runs Microsoft Sentinel alongside Splunk during a phased migration. Selected Microsoft Sentinel workspace tables must be streamed continuously to a scalable integration endpoint from which Splunk can consume the records. Which Azure service should the architect place between the workspace export and Splunk? The available options are as follows. Option A, a Microsoft Sentinel workbook. Option B, Azure Data Factory. Option C, a Microsoft Sentinel Data Connector. Option D, Azure Event Hubs. The correct answer is option D, Azure Event Hubs. Here's why. Azure Monitor and Log Analytics Data Export can continuously send supported workspace table data to Azure Event Hubs. Event Hubs provides a scalable streaming endpoint that an external SIEM integration can consume. Why are the other options not correct? A. A workbook visualizes Sentinel data and does not export it. B. Azure Data Factory is a data integration service, but is not the native continuous workspace streaming destination for this architecture. C. Sentinel data connectors ingest data into Sentinel. They are not used to export workspace records to Splunk. Exam tip. Data connectors generally bring telemetry into Sentinel. Use supported workspace export destinations such as Event Hubs when another platform must consume selected tables. Question number 226. Scenario. A security operations team needs reusable Microsoft Sentinel dashboards that combine queries, tables, charts, and interactive controls to analyze security events and operational trends. Which Microsoft Sentinel capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Threat Intelligence Indicators. Option B, Playbooks. Option C, Workbooks. Option D, Notebooks. The correct answer is option C, Workbooks. Here's why. Microsoft Sentinel Workbooks provide interactive dashboards and reports that combine KQL queries with tables, charts, parameters, and other visual elements. Why are the other options not correct? A. Threat intelligence supplies indicators and enrichment, not dashboards. B. Playbooks automate response workflows through Azure Logic Apps. D. Notebooks support advanced investigation, analytics, and data science, but are not the standard reusable dashboard capability. Exam tip. Use workbooks for visualization, playbooks for automation, and notebooks for advanced analytical investigation. Question number 227. Scenario. A global organization is consolidating its security operations in Microsoft Sentinel. Repetitive incident handling tasks must be automated, and analysts must be able to receive and triage incident information through Microsoft Teams. Which Microsoft Sentinel capability should the security architect include in the SOAR design? The available options are as follows. Option A, KQL queries. Option B, Microsoft Sentinel workbooks. Option C, Microsoft Sentinel playbooks. Option D, Microsoft Sentinel data connectors. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Sentinel playbooks. Here's why. Sentinel playbooks automate incident response actions through workflow integrations. Playbooks can enrich incidents, notify analysts, and send interactive Microsoft Teams messages or adaptive cards for collaborative triage. Why are the other options not correct? A. KQL retrieves and analyzes data, but does not orchestrate response workflows. B. Workbooks visualize security data and operational metrics. D. Data connectors ingest telemetry into Microsoft Sentinel. Exam tip. Use analytics rules for detection, automation rules for orchestration logic, and playbooks for executable response workflows. Question number 228. Scenario. A financial organization uses Microsoft Defender for Identity to protect its on-premises Active Directory environment. The security team plans to create dormant decoy accounts that have no legitimate business use. Any attempt to authenticate by using one of the accounts must generate a high-confidence alert. Which Defender for Identity capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, standalone sensors. Option B, sensitive entity tags. Option C, honey token entity tags. Option D, Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels. The correct answer is option C, honey token entity tags. Here's why. Defender for Identity honey token tags identify dormant decoy accounts that should never be used legitimately. Authentication associated with a tagged honey token account generates an alert for investigation. Why are the other options not correct? A. Sensors collect identity telemetry but do not designate decoy accounts. B. Sensitive tags identify high-value entities rather than accounts created specifically as traps. D. Sensitivity labels classify and protect information, not Active Directory identities. Exam tip. A honey token is a deceptive identity whose use is inherently suspicious. A sensitive tag marks a legitimate high-value identity. Question number 229. Scenario. A defense contractor has an Azure subscription protected by Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Before hosting a new federal workload, the governance team must evaluate the subscription against NIST SP-800 to 53 controls. What should the security architect recommend as the initial configuration? The available options are as follows. Option A, connect Defender for Cloud alerts to Microsoft Sentinel. Option B, assign the applicable NIST SP-800 to 53 built-in Azure policy initiative at the subscription scope. Option C, review only the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark compliance results. Option D, create a cloud application access policy in Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps. The correct answer is option B. Assign the applicable NIST SP-800 to 53 built-in Azure policy initiative at the subscription scope. Here's why. Defender for Cloud regulatory standards are implemented through Azure policy initiatives. Assigning the applicable NIST initiative establishes the control mappings and assessments required to review subscription compliance. Why are the other options not correct? A. The Sentinel connector ingests alerts, but does not enable NIST compliance assessment. C. The Cloud Security Benchmark is a general Microsoft baseline and is not a substitute for the requested NIST standard. D. A Defender for Cloud apps policy governs SaaS access rather than Azure resource compliance. Exam tip. Defender for Cloud displays regulatory results, while Azure policy initiatives define and assign the underlying compliance assessments. Question number 230. Scenario. Your company uses Microsoft Defender for Cloud and Microsoft Sentinel. An application architecture routes client HTTPS traffic through an Azure Application Gateway with Web Application Firewall, WAF, then through Azure Firewall Premium, and finally to Azure Virtual Machines. You are designing a logging and auditing solution for the proposed architecture. The solution must meet the following requirements. Integrate Azure Web Application Firewall, WAF, logs directly with Microsoft Sentinel. Forward operating system and security event logs from the virtual machines to the centralized log analytics workspace used by Microsoft Sentinel, using the latest agent technology. What should you include in the solution? Complete the recommendation by selecting the appropriate options. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. For WAF log integration, configure the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Sentinel data connectors, the Azure Diagnostics extension, Azure Network Watcher, or workflow automation. Statement 2. For the virtual machines OS log collection, deploy the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, Azure Storage Analytics, the Azure Diagnostics Extension, or Workflow Automation. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Sentinel Data Connectors. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Azure Monitor Agent, AMA. Here is the overall reasoning. Azure WAF logs are ingested into Microsoft Sentinel using native Microsoft Sentinel data connectors. To collect OS-level event logs and security logs from Azure virtual machines into a log analytics workspace, the modern standard is deploying the Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, which replaces the deprecated Log Analytics/MMA agent. Exam tip. The Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, is the current unified agent for collecting telemetry and logs from virtual machines to Azure Monitor and Microsoft Sentinel. You have completed Part 6 of the SC-100 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.